Guys, we have a really unique episode today. I'm really excited to have KP Reddy in as our guest. This is unique for a couple reasons. First of all, this is the first episode we've done with Next Story Up where we have multiple guests with Shonodeep and K.P. today. It's also the first episode where we have a guest from outside of Schneider Electric. So I wanted to get season 2 kicked off with a bang and contacted Shonodeep Modak, who is the CMO for North America for Schneider Electric. And the very first thing that he said was, I'd like to have KP Reddy in as a guest. So Shonodeep, if you could maybe start by telling us a little bit about why you thought KP would be a great guest for us today. I think that would be an awesome place to start. And then we can allow KP to describe some of the things he does, who he is, and Shadow Ventures.
Awesome. Tom, thank you very much. And, I've become a big fan of your Next Story Up podcast already, so I'm looking forward to the new season here. But seriously, in all seriousness, your story about the Lyft experience is exactly what we're trying to embody in the transformation of Schneider Electric in terms of how we go to market, and really building a view of customers that's focused more on the outcomes and the needs versus the products that we sell. And so we've been doing a lot of work on reshaping the marketing organization around customer segments and around our channels so that we can better engage. And we're doing it both physically when we think about how we're creating campaigns that are working with our sales team as well as with events and other things, the traditional marketing sense. But we're also doing a lot of stuff digitally. So how our customers are interacting with our website, how they're placing their orders, how we're solving problems, how they can log in and self-serve. These are all the things that our team is trying to do. And when you asked me, like you said earlier, when you asked me about bringing a guest on board to talk about innovation and this customer experience and the change of the experience digitally, the first person that came to mind is KP Reddy. We had engaged KP through, even before I joined Schneider on a number of our different initiatives on digital tools, etc. And what KP has done is quite remarkable, is bringing a new way of thinking for us. And I thought it would be really relevant in terms of how we think about customer experience enabled by new technologies. So maybe KP, I'll introduce yourself and what you do, and we can go from there.
I'm KP Reddy. I'm the founder of Shadow Ventures and CEO, and we're a venture capital firm. What's pretty unique about us is we focus on nascent markets and things like the building industry, things like healthcare, where we believe there's still so much room for transformation and innovation, whereas a lot of other markets have already gone through transformation. We think there's these nascent markets that still have a huge opportunity. And part of that has been not just writing a check, but also providing counsel and hands-on experience, and really kind of fulfilling this aspirational notion. We believe successful companies like Schneider have success, but they aspire to do more. They aspire to be more innovative, and it's very hard to do it yourself. So in many ways, we're kind of that catalyst. So whether it's aspiring, an entrepreneur that's aspiring to be successful and have the big exit, we're helping with that. Whether it's a corporate that's trying to be just that much better, as well as our investors that are looking for better returns. So we believe we dovetail well with people that have high aspirations, but also recognize that they can't get there on their own.
That's fantastic. I think describing the building space as room for nascent technology is really exciting to me. I work for a really large company, obviously, and even to work for a really large company that's in a space that has so much room to grow, where folks are doing venture capital and nascent technologies is inspiring. And I think it's actually fitting that you all are talking to me from a WeWork today, which is a pretty decent example of some people that have found some ways to use buildings in a different way than people may have envisioned it before.
And even in thinking about WeWork, there's so many opportunities for, even a company like ourselves that has products that can help not only with building management, but also in energy management and help reduce the energy footprint across multiple facilities. And KP's been helping us think about new companies that are out there that we should be looking at and bringing in new technology. So we've been doing a lot of work in the BIM space, which is building information modeling. Yeah, I'm not going to pretend to be any sort of expert here, but maybe KP, some of the things you're seeing there, and then we can talk about other new technologies.
Yeah, the interesting thing about BIM has been it's been around for a minute. It's not new. But what you're starting to see, what we've seen is now you have a generational shift where you have new people coming to the industry that if it wasn't for BIM, they might not be in this industry. If they were to go draw that detail by hand in CAD, they would feel like it's an archaic industry versus, we have a little bit of a Minecraft generation that's coming through now that think about spatial things and 3D. And so BIM has been, I think, while there's still plenty of room for the adoption and optimization in the industry, there's so much room and so much headroom left in terms of the leverage BIM. What I've really been excited about is it's been a great way for us to attract and retain people in our industry that would have never necessarily stayed in our industry. They would have done their first job and realized how boring it was, and then left. Whereas they come in and do BIM, they're like, yeah, I'm virtually building things in a computer. Like, that's cool. They can go home and share with their friends the cool stuff they're doing. So I think BIM's kind of made the industry cool again.
I mean, there's a couple things that you mentioned there that really get my attention. One is, I don't know near as much about startups as you do, but I know that timing is really important. And with BIM being something that, as you mentioned, has been around for a little while, it's interesting to see how that's being rejuvenated with a new generation that's coming through that might look at that and use it differently. I think that's a fascinating point, matching up a technology with timing. And then the second is this idea of a Minecraft generation and how different ways that a generation might interface with the world or spend their time ultimately will affect what drives them in the workforce and what they find value in, and maybe create some value for startups that are trying to harness that, because you're focusing on occupant or user, in this case, experience.
One of the things that we love and struggle with the building industry, right? If you think about a building and design and construction, it is the largest product purchase you will ever make, sight unseen.
Yeah.
If you're building a hospital, you're spending $250 million to buy something that you haven't been able to touch, feel, smell, experience, any of it. It's probably it's kind of craziness if you think about it.
Yeah.
We have to go out and try on 10 shirts before we buy one, and that's a $20 purchase.
Yeah.
Right? A $250 million purchase, we don't get to know anything about it other than historically what's been a set of drawings, which quite honestly, most people don't know how to process that and visualize that. So what we've really seen that I think is fascinating is you have BIM and the quality of visualization going on, and now you have things like VR and AR, which if you're a 50-year-old project superintendent, you may not walk around a job site with a headset on. But if you're a 25-year-old superintendent, you are very comfortable walking around with a VR headset on to understand what you're building. And if you think about our industry, people like to make it look like buildings and construction are like manufacturing. Yeah. Whereas in reality, we're really more like the movie industry. Everybody shows up and works on a project under their own brand. They do the project together, and then they move on to the next one. And they act like every project they're working on is a new, like they don't know anything. So it's like this Groundhog Day effect. So if you look at visualization and technology as a way that really cuts down all the errors in communication, I think it's a massive transformational thing. We did studies back in the day that said 20% of a construction job ends up in the construction dumpster. Wow. So if we can just cut that waste, you could give a home to everybody on the planet.
Wow.
Right. Cut it from 20% to 15%. We're still going to mess things up. All of a sudden, think about global impact. Think about it. So as much as we're innovating the process and how we get communication done, because you have a bunch of people running out, you have 70 or 80 entities going out to build something that's never been seen before, and everybody's kind of crossing their fingers hoping it goes well.
I think bringing up AR and VR right there is really important, because even for me, and I've been in the industry for 10 years, there's almost a stigma around it in that it seems so different than what we've done, and it almost seems so futuristic that it's like, I don't know how aggressive people champion it. But what you're saying makes a ton of sense because you're already seeing people make purchases with the use of AR and VR. So you mentioned clothes. I know people are looking at developing smart mirrors that allow you to try clothes on in retail. I know furniture is something that people are now using AR, putting it up against a wall, kind of seeing how it looks before they purchase it. So it makes all the sense in the world, and actually far more sense due to the size that you're talking about for a construction project.
Maybe I could add something here. As we're a product manufacturer, and now we're shifting more and more to our software solutions. KP, you talked about you can't experience the product. Same thing goes with a lot of the power distribution products or controls that we make. And I think you can't really touch, taste, feel it, and you only get to really know when it doesn't work how it works or really experience it. And certainly the purchaser is different from the user. And I'm super interested, how you think about bringing that to life through, some of the technologies that you're involved in, and how you think about removing waste in the project, like we think about removing waste of resources and energy. So I guess just very interesting how those things look at.
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's an interesting dynamic that's evolved, with technology optimizing everything. It's no longer B2B, it's no longer B2C, like that's not how it is. I wrote a blog post on H to H. It's all human to human. And if you think about the Schneider suite of products, the idea of the customer is the building owner isn't really true anymore. The customer is the user. If you're selling into a restaurant, it's like, how are you delivering an experience to that customer coming into the restaurant, not the restaurant owner? So we're having to learn how to adapt, because it used to be, well, if this hospital buys my product, perfect. That's all I care about because they're the customer. Well, it's not really the hospital that's your customer. It's the patient, it's the physicians, it's the nurses and the practitioners. They are really your customer. And really the hospital owner is just a willing participant. And so how you think about experience has to get pushed downstream to the end user. And if you can create a unique experience with your product, even though you're kind of behind the scenes, right? Nobody, I used to be in the telecom industry, and we used to joke around that dial tone comes from God. And if there's no dial tone, no matter how bad the storm is, if there's no dial tone, you start questioning your faith in God, because like, what's going on in my life?
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit with electricity, right? It's just assumed it works. Guess what? Until it doesn't.
Right.
And so how do you create an experience that's positive and always top of mind? And that's a challenge for everybody. And I think it's changing how you think about markets. Spend more time with doctors, not with the building managers, right?
Yeah.
Or that idea.
So is that the type of thing that you encourage your startup founders to do? I mean, because there's a lot of different ways you could look at buildings. You could have a technology that you want to apply to as many buildings as you can. And at Schneider Electric, we do that. So we've got segments that are hospitals, as you mentioned. There's segments that are hotels. There's segments that are commercial office buildings. All of them have occupants, but all of those occupants have different expectations when they're in that space. Do you encourage your founders to focus on a segment in particular? Okay.
Our industry is massive.
Yeah.
Right. And, I get every startup pitch deck every day, and it's like, oh, we're going after $1 trillion market.
Yep. If
we can only get 1%, we're going to be billionaires. Right. It's like, okay, that's cute.
Yep.
How much in resources do you have to do market, customer acquisition? And if you don't narrow that down, you can't spend $500,000 to go after a market and go after 3 markets. If you're going to go after, we're going to go after all buildings, well, okay, $500,000 doesn't get you very far. If you say, I'm going to go after hospitals, still doesn't get you very far. You might have to say, we're going to go after hospitals in Georgia. Yep. And then maybe you're aligned with your resources. So with startups, it's, we joke around like, it's my job to fight the optimism.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the, oh no, we'll sell $1 trillion and we're the best. Like, so part of my job is to say, no, there's quite a, matching resources with the markets you're going after is massive. We try to really help them understand that to be successful, you have to align your resources well. You can't you can't fake it. You've got to really understand it.
So that this reminds me of a book that I really like, which is Peter Thiel's 0 to 1, about when you start getting a really dedicated, loyal initial customer base, and then growing from there. As you succeed. I know that you have a best-selling book as well about startups with a great title. It's something along the lines of what you know about startups is wrong, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah, it's interesting. People get my book thinking it's one thing, and it's really more of a personal journey. Startups tend to live in this world where I have to work 24 hours a day, sacrifice everything, and a lot of it is my own story of like almost dying and running a startup and running myself to the ground, and really trying to share with startups that this idea of the startup hustle is made up. Right. If you're actually solving real problems and you're pragmatic and approach it in a pragmatic way and solve real problems for customers with highly defensible solutions, you don't have to like sacrifice everything to get there. And so a lot of it's just kind of sharing my story, because I think there's plenty of stories of how people made a gazillion dollars and were very successful.
Right.
Mine's kind of the anti that, like, here's how you can really screw up your life. Let me tell you all the things I messed up,
Yeah.
and I'll share them all with you, and hopefully you learn from them.
That's fascinating. In full disclosure, I have not read it, but that's a pretty good endorsement. I'll go check it out. If you were to launch a startup that is defensible in the building space today, what are the portions of the industry? What niches are most attractive to you right now, and get you excited about what people are doing in the space?
I think the industry, we've got our challenges, right? We have labor shortages.
Yep.
Right now, there's still plenty of backlog of work to be done. I actually believe, part of my job as a venture capitalist is I spend an hour a day, 2 hours a day studying economic data and trying to predict what I think may or may not happen to protect our investments. And one of the things that we see is like there's still plenty of backlog. We also think that there's a backlog shelf with institutional projects that have been priced out because of the frothiness that have been put on hold. So even if some of these larger commercial projects fall through any kind of economic blip, we still think there's hospitals, there's schools, there's universities that have backlog. They can't even get people to bid on projects. These are so frothy. So if you look at the continued labor crisis that we have in our industry, and just enlightenment around waste. We're all starting to understand it's not about necessarily recycling our plastics. It's these buildings that consume tons of resources. So what we really are trying to understand is how can you do things that are not single threaded? So if I look at a startup and you say, hey, I can solve one problem, that's interesting. Tell me what it means on a macro level. Tell me what you're going to do to change the world. The other thing we look at is if you're highly successful, name the 3 companies that'll lose. Like the idea of creative destruction is super important when you're a VC, because at the end of the day, there's kind of finite dollars, and someone has to lose, right? Someone's got to lose, and if you're doing the right things, someone will lose, and we think that's super important.
That's really cool stuff. I think that, personally, I know I benefit from hearing that type of thought process. I love the idea of who's going to lose. That's something that I'd never heard before.
And you have to be competitive. I stopped playing soccer because I was either hurting myself or hurting others, because my brain and body were not being symbiotic on the field. But I think for a startup, helping them understand that, you need to go transform the world, but you also need to beat somebody. That's important.
So when you're looking at another thing you mentioned before that caught my attention that I thought was really neat is you were encouraging some of your startup founders to go speak to surgeons or people in hospitals, right? Do you find that this is information that surgeons or someone like that want to share? I mean, are they?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so we encourage, if you look at it, we talk about, I teach a few classes on market research, and one of the things we talk about is macro data, census data, all that stuff. That's all great data, but that's really more of a compass, right? It's not a roadmap. It gives you direction. But real customer discovery is like Google Maps. You're going to take a bunch of left turns, right turns. You're going to get lost, and hopefully you get to where you need to go. And that requires a heavy lift. That requires, in startup world, they call it customer discovery. I call it customer interrogation.
Okay.
And what I coach my startups on, I tell them, like, go home and binge watch Law and Order. Watch Law and Order over and over again. When they get the criminal in the box, they don't say, hey, we think you're guilty of this crime. And they say, oh, sure. Thanks. You're right. You caught me. The handcuffs, right? It's all about catching people in a lie. It's all about interrogating them. And what I really encourage them is if you go to doctors and say, wouldn't you like to see more patients? The answer is going to be yes. Would you like to see better patient outcomes? The answer is yes. So that's part of that startup optimism. So it's really about how do you interrogate the market and the customers and the users in a way to kind of catch them in a lie. And that's different, and there's a creativity, and can't be done through a survey monkey. Like, that's not how that works, right? And that's the way you find authentic demand. That's the way you find. What we find is with large companies, there's a head fake, right? There's so much brand equity, there's so much distribution, there's so much existing customers. You can launch a product that's subpar, generate 50 million in revenue just because you're a big battleship.
Right.
You find out later, like, oh, that wasn't actually a good product, right? Because there was no authentic demand, because we didn't ask the right questions. And I think large companies really struggle with that because there is a head fake that happens. Because unlike a startup, the startup sold $50 million in its first year, they'd be thrilled. But it's a lot of work to get there. So they actually have to have organic and authentic demand. And I think the challenge with larger companies is you get early signaling that you have a winner, and then maybe you don't.
Shonodeep, this portion of the conversation sounds like it's moving closer to your world. What kind of thoughts do you have about that?
Yeah, no, great questions. I mean, we're always, I love your point about authentic demand, because we can easily, in my world, get attracted to the shiny object that is this new segment or this new, what all the trends are, electric vehicles and airports and mobility and that sort of thing. And you really have to get around what are the outcomes that we can really create specific results in, given whether or not we're channel-led or sales-led, or and what business cycle, long cycle, short cycle business, and what we can affect in marketing, and especially in a B2B business where the product is not experiential. So we have what I call ghost brands in many cases, where you can't see, touch, smell it. It's like putting gas in your car. You don't really know if it's working any better than the next guy's gasoline. And so for us, we're trying to bring personality to the products and show, just like you're talking about AR and VR, but how do you talk about your products, or how do you talk about the solutions in a way that makes the customer be able to experience it even with never actually being able to do so. So that's really where it comes down to. And we're finding a lot of digital tools can work on selling software, but can also work on selling more of our traditional core products.
Shonodeep, you mentioned ghost brands, and that's something I think I've seen you write about or heard you talk about before. Could you take just a minute about to describe that?
Yeah, so after reflecting in my career now over the last, nearly 20 years, I realized that I've always worked in these large B2B matrix companies, but the common thread across each of them, whether or not it was ExxonMobil, GE, and now Schneider Electric, is the products that we manufactured, whether or not it was motor oil, or if it was power plants or electrical switchgear, they're all very similar in nature, because to KP's point about a building, when you're buying it, you don't know what it's going to, you can't experience it until you're, and even when you're actually using it, you still can't measure and experience a lot of it, right? So ghost brands is a term that I've coined that basically says you can't touch, smell, taste, feel it, but how you can personify it and how you can turn it into something that somebody can experience through ways of explaining it is the challenge, and how we can make your ghost brand come to life is what I've been doing a lot in my career.
That's fantastic. We got two thought leaders on here coming up with a bunch of cool stuff. Before I let you guys go, I've got two questions. One's specific to this episode, and another one is kind of what I like to ask everybody as I'm leaving the show. But in my intro today, I talked a lot about mission statements and what I discovered in the back of a Lyft ride, and it really inspired me. And I am a big believer in mission statements. I think that they feature prominently in what I try to do, and I think that companies are successful when they do them. I noticed, KP, on your LinkedIn page, among all the other interesting things that you've got going on, like 20,000 followers and stuff like that, the first thing that you mentioned was the mission statement for Shadow Ventures, which is to invest in seed stage companies that are led by dynamic entrepreneurs focusing on changing tech nascent, which you've used that term in this interview, industries with disruptive technologies. How much does that guide you? How much should that guide the companies that you're funding? That well-defined core mission statement.
It's top of mind every day. I think one of the things that we always contemplate is, you build a thesis for a reason. You build a mission for a reason. You don't do it overnight. It iterates itself quite well. And I think part of what we really look at, if we want to deliver the returns and results that our investors expect, we think we've built a thesis and a system that does that. And you have to be able to go back to it. I mean, we talk about it literally every day. I mean, we talk to probably 5 to 10 entrepreneurs a day as a team. And that's what we're constantly asking ourselves. How does it fit? How is it being disruptive? And once again, disruptive means someone has to lose, right? It's not 5-year-old T-ball. We really someone's gotta win. And I think that's super important. So it helps you also differentiate between products that are going to kind of be more of a vitamin versus a painkiller. And the problem with a vitamin-like product is it's just all marketing spend. It's not about results. Versus a vitamin, it's all about kind of hacking the problem and delivering a real solution. Because you shouldn't have to kill yourself if you have the right product and the right market. The friction of customer acquisition should be very little, and I think we look at it very closely.
That's terrific. Shonodeep, you're very intentional with the way that you're laying out the marketing segment strategy. Do you have kind of an overarching mission behind that as well, I would imagine?
Yeah, I think I really like what K.P. talked about around vitamin and painkiller. I think we're trying to shift from being talking about features, benefits, and advantages, and really shifting into the outcomes that customers are solving for. We're doing a lot more listening, and I think my mission would be listen and then respond with the right solution. If I could encompass it in a few words. And we don't do enough listening in our world, in these large companies making product manufacturers. We're too ready to push our product out versus the listening piece. That's a big change that I'm trying to drive.
As a podcast host, I'm a big fan of getting people to listen. Well, listen, I like to ask everybody at the end of these discussions, and really thank you both for your time. It's been so informative. We really appreciate it, especially KP, you joining us. I like to ask why my guests are excited to be professionals in the building technology industry. What gets you going? What makes it exciting to be in building tech versus anything else?
Yeah, so I think we currently live in a world where there's not a lot of permanence, right? Apps come and go. We dispose of our phones every couple of years, and we have to take a step back and remind ourselves the people and professionals we work with every day are literally building and shaping the planet and the world around us. There's great permanence in the things that we do. More now more so than ever, right? You don't tear down a hospital every 5 years, but Microsoft will send you a new OS every 12 months, right? So yeah. I think we now live in a world of, we're not even buying cars anymore. We're Ubering everywhere. There's a lot of impermanence in the world. And I think we have to always remind ourselves we work with an industry of high caliber, high ethical, smart people that are literally shaping the planet and the world around us. And that comes with great responsibility, and we all get to be part of it.
It's hard not to be fired up by that. That's pretty good. Shonodeep, do you want to give it a try, or what do you think?
I can't top that. I cannot top that. I'll leave it there.
Man, guys, it's incredible talking with you. I really do appreciate it. I'm sure our listeners are going to be excited about this. I want to thank you both for joining the podcast, and we really appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.